got involved in photography is my dad was always involved in photography. He had his own dark room. And so I always had interest. In fact, one interesting story about photography is when he gave me a little roll camera and put the film in it, and I probably was only maybe 5 or 6 years old, went out and took pictures, and I was so anxious to see the pictures that I opened up the camera to see the pictures, and he said, well, it doesn't work that way with film photography. I'm a very visual learner, so photography's always been important to me, and so I'm basically self-taught, but as a theatrical lighting designer, the other part of my creative life, that's how you record what you do, and then later as a director you want to record exactly what's going on in your life. So you master that type of photography, and coming with doing the theatrical design comes having the same eye on things. So I feel I have a really strong eye for composition and the basics of photography, understanding lighting, because lighting is the basis of all photography and everything. So no, I haven't had formal training, but what I do constantly is I have a library of books. I'm constantly online looking for new ways, new and better ways to do everything. So that's probably my initial background in photography. Well, I always feel like creative photography, a lot of people talk about taking pictures, and that's true of snapshots and things like that, and family pictures. I like to think I'm making pictures, and a lot of times my goal, well, many times I go out and just freelance and find what I call a found still life and take that. And many times I'll come back after doing a photo session, an unplanned one, we'll say, maybe going out and shooting of things of various subjects. I'll look at them, but I'll put them away for a while and then revisit them and take a look at them and say, oh, this is something now I can develop. So the photo that I took, now I can make into the kind of a fine art, especially with fine art. Now obviously with more commercial photography, you have a goal in mind, whether it's a headshot, PR thing, you have a definite goal in mind and everything. With my creative and fine art photography though, many times, and I do set out on like photo missions, and I take my my wife Carolyn along because we both are photographers. It's amazing the kind of things that we will shoot together, and it's amazing sometimes the things she will see that I don't see, and it's always in your eye that what you see. So creative photography is a matter of manipulating these things to make the final result, much like an artist may take a photograph or their own visual impression of something and create a painting. Depending on the photography, I kind of consider myself a photo generalist. I have a wide variety of subjects, from nature and scenics to people, aerial photography and things like that. So each one has a little difference in what I try to express, but I try to focus on details that may otherwise go unseen. Especially my early photography, I a lot of times used only a telephoto lens, so I could really zoom in on one part of a scene that otherwise people would miss. I don't do that as much now because I sometimes use the wide-angle lens to capture a more grandiose view of things. But still, I'll take sometimes the base image and try to move it into so it looks like a painting, and I do that through photo manipulation. Sometimes that's a negative connotation, but a lot of it would not qualify for National Geographic. But for fine art photography, I want something different. I want to achieve a look that's people might walk up to things and say, wow, is that a painting? Is that? And I'm not trying to take away from the artists who paint, but I paint with a digital format. They paint with oils and acrylics and watercolor. So my medium works somewhat differently, but I like to achieve the result. And one thing I've been doing a lot lately is rendering most of my things on canvas, and that does give it a little more of an artsy look to it when you're doing the creative photography. Well, obviously people will point to Ansel Adams, which is a fantastic renderer of black and white photography. What he did in the darkroom, by the way, with chemical photography, I like to think I do with digital photography. He would totally understand the digital photography of today and how he always looked at the negative as just the blueprint. The print was the final work, and he spent lots of time manipulating that print. I do the same. Other people from his era, like Edward Weston, Alfred Stieglitz. They have strong black and white photo realistic impressions of things. Also, like Edward Weston did. He really has brought a lot of black and white. And then Edward Curtis did kind of an interesting thing, kind of revitalized the West, posing many Native Americans in Indian costume, but you have those images. More modern things, I like the photo generalists, kind of like Tom Ang and Hedgeko. They both do much what I do. They have a wide variety of subjects, from people to scenics to highly manipulated images. Fashion photographers like Richard Avedon and Ann Leibowitz, they sort of push the edge of the envelope a lot with what they do and how they concept. But then they have Gary Bernstein on the other thing, very much a commercial photographer who does great headshots, a lot of celebrities. And finally, outside of photography, like Edward Hopper, I love how he uses light in his paintings, oil paintings, and great subjects. And Jack Vittorano, who is a Scottish painter, has really edgy subjects that are great. And use of light is probably the thing I learned most from all these photographers. Well, a lot of people will know me as a Canon shooter, and I always tease them about that. But possibly it's just because that's the camera, when I really got serious about photography, is what I learned on. Started with a Canon AE1 and moved up through different things, and you just become familiar with it. In digital photography, though, when Canon introduced the 5D, it was the first, I'll call, affordable full-frame camera. That's when I jumped on board in serious digital photography. I was still shooting film and manipulating it in digital, but that's when I really jumped on board. And Canon did something actually Olympus developed. It's called the CMOS sensor. This is a little bit technical, but digital cameras up to that time were using a CCD sensor, including Nikon. They were able, with their processor, to make the CMOS sensor work, which is a much better sensor but required much more computer processing in the camera. And so Canon launched way far ahead too. If you look now, even on the sidelines at sports events and events, the white lenses you see there are their L-series lenses. Those are all Canon shooters. Nikon has caught up, and in fact in some areas maybe has passed, and Sony is the one to watch out too. Sony has developed as you know, DSLR has a mirror that flips up. They have what's called a translucent lens, and that's going to be the wave of the future. Having a little mirror flip up to expose the actual digital background there, that's going to be part of the past, but that's not going to happen right away. It's going to be probably like 5-10 years before that does. But I'm familiar with Canon things, and one of the big things is once you invest in that, you're investing in lenses. My biggest transition was from a film camera. I skipped the entire EOS generation of film cameras because I had a huge investment in high quality lenses. And to make that move to a digital camera, I had to go into a whole series of new EOS digital lenses. So I am a Canon shooter and proud of it. Well, like we said before, I'm a Canon shooter. Currently, I use 5D Mark IIs, which are about a 24 megapixel camera, full frame. And usually when I'm doing outside shoots, especially out in the field, I take two bodies with me. I have actually two of them. I actually have two 5D, regular 5Ds. And I have a backup small camera, digital. Anyway, I also use L-series lenses. I have a 70 to 200 2.8 L-series lens, a 24 to 105, and those are my go-to lenses all the time. They virtually live on the camera bodies. I do have a few other what I call walk-around lenses, which is a 28 to 200, but I very seldom use that. These are high-quality lenses. And back before even digital cameras, one of the things that was always said is the lens is what really makes the picture. So you have really high-quality lenses that are image stabilized, and it really ends up a lot. I use, for post-processing, I use Photoshop. I'm in the Photoshop 5.5, and I use several plugins, which is the Nick plugin. It has a variety of things from their black and white processors, the Vivisa, to a whole range of filter effects, and we won't go into those. And for portrait photography, I didn't do this right away, but there's a program called Portrait Pro. And I used to manually edit all my portraits, and I still do to a certain degree. but the Portrait Pro speeds up portrait editing dramatically. So what I might spend a half hour, 40 minutes doing real detailed portrait, I can accomplish about in 5 minutes because it does many things. It heals up blemishes and things like that. And if you don't like it, you can undo anything. So that's kind of, and I finally use a Quizmo Toshiba computer laptop actually, but it's a high-end laptop with actually 3 hard drives in it, 2 actual hard drives and 1 solid state drive, and I have a whole range of external drives that are either on the network or everything, because I back up, because if you save 1 copy, and I've had drives that have just crashed, but fortunately I've always had a backup there to do it. So that's probably my workflow and how I work. Well, one technique that almost every photographer that's worth their salt knows in outdoor photography, especially if it's a pretty sunny day, is using a polarizer or circular polarizer. That technique is not exactly can be duplicated in any kind of software yet. You can sort of do it with saturation, but it will, most people think, well, it'll take the glare off things, but it will also dramatically saturate your image with and make skies bluer, greens greener, and it's probably the one filter that's almost always on the lens of my camera for outdoor photography, unless it's completely overcast, when in that case it almost does no good. The other one I tell people, and most photographers will probably balk at this one, is in Canon they have not the auto mode, but they have what's called the P mode. P mode is program, and I like to think of it as a super manual mode. It's a good starting point. When I go out, and sometimes you don't have time to do a whole lot of scenes, you can take a reading on things and get a rough, good, really good, decent exposure. But the other part is you can then exchange shutter speed, aperture as you need to adjust. And so a lot of people, when they're told by photographers you can only shoot in manual to be a real photographer, and I agree with that to some extent, but don't be afraid to try the P mode. And again, this is different than the auto mode. The auto mode is snapshot mode, and that's okay. The other thing I use still to some degree is I used to use lots of filters on the camera. Now you can now duplicate a lot of those in Photoshop or Nik software, but a couple of filters I still like to use. If the sky is not quite blue enough, there's called a blue graduated filter, where it's clear at the bottom and eventually becomes blue at the top. Or if you want to create a sunset, the same type of thing. There's a whole wide range of those things. That you can all of a sudden enhance what nature is not giving you at the moment for whatever reason. And again, you can do that in Photoshop to some degrees, but sometimes it's easier to do it. Take the photo with it on, take it with it not on, and you have the choice to do that. So I think filters are very important still to this day, though I use them a little less because you can do some of the things like that. Those are some of my real good tips.